Hey guys, welcome to another video. I haven't done one of these in so long. We're going through another COVID wave here where we live, and I just have been kind of doing a lot of watercoloring with watercolor pencils. I treated myself to a whole huge big box because I had a feeling we were gonna be staying inside a lot this winter. And so I splurged and got the full set of these Museum Aquarelles by Caran D'ache. And I know that there are many videos showing all the colors, so I'm not going to show those here. And I know there's a lot of people that are really good at using colored pencils to do portrait coloring. And again, that's not my forte, but I am trying to learn. Basically, the point of the video is that I thought I would just show you what a beginner is able to pull out of these pencils for basic watercoloring and some thoughts and opinions that I had. So this effort here is a combination of using the pencils and the wax pencils. And so I had taken several pencil classes from actual artists on Patreon, and one of the things that many of them refer to is doing a foundation painting or an underpainting with watercolor, and that way it's a lot less effort filling in the tooth of the paper with your wax or oil-based pencils. And so that's what I did here. I used the watercolor pencils for everything as the underpainting from the Caran D'ache line, and then I used their oil-based pencils, which are the Pablo line, and all of the colors relate to each other really, really well. And so I have a wax base layer on top and a watercolor painting on the bottom, and they don't have, you know, unlimited colors, and I did find that there weren't as many portrait colors as I would have liked to do skin tones in particular from this line. But once you lean into the Caran D'ache Luminance, which is their wax-based pencils, there's a lot more to choose from. So if you're just doing an underpainting to just get a nice first wash with the watercolor pencils, it is very, very pigmented, and that's where I found these pencils offered a huge advantage. Earlier, several years ago, I bought this set, which was more affordable, and I was just getting started, and so that made more sense to me at the time. And even though these are considered somewhat artist grade, I wouldn't call them artist grade in comparison to the Aquarelle line. And I did a little test so that people can see for comparison. So this is a Prima stamp, and this is Arches watercolor paper, and on the right side is the Aquarelle pencils, and on the left side is the Supracolor pencils, and everything in the skin tone is from the Aquarelle. And so you can see there's different skin tones that you can get from the Aquarelle line, and I personally thought the colors from the Aquarelle line for the hair color, there's plenty in there. So it's really just a matter of figuring out how to layer the colors and then blend them was the key. And I'm clearly still learning, but I'm just basically using the standard coloring techniques that you see people use in Copic coloring. So this was the best result. And I wanted to say that the reason why I'm using this book here, it's Magical Dawn by Hannah Carlson. It's not because I'm really in love with the illustrations so much, even though she is an amazing illustrator. It's just not something I like, you know, to me it's a bit much, but it's great for practicing if you're really wanting to practice skin tones and eye colors. And the paper is thick enough to handle a light wash of color. I think I was able to get 2 washes of color, but then the paper will start shredding, and so you really have to go real easy. But the beauty of the Aquarelle pencils is that you barely need to put any pigment on at all, and there's so much color payoff. And one of the things that really discouraged me for the longest time was not understanding how to use these pencils, because there is lots of wax in them. And the key is to not press heavy on your paper. And so it may seem counterintuitive for people that are used to using wax-based pencils. I've seen a lot of videos where people just go hard from the beginning. But if you go and study from the artists who do colored pencil work for a living, they really sometimes go up to 17 layers of color to get the depth and richness and your midtones, your highlights, and your darkest tones. And so technically speaking, you're going to get a lot better results if you can somehow print these off on watercolor paper or color pencil paper. I have a inkjet printer that does color, and I have a laser printer that only does black and white, and I can't seem to get any artist grade paper to go through. It's just too thick. So if anybody happens to know what is a great paper to run through your printer, I would absolutely love to know that. So I think overall, compared to the other brands of pencils, Caran D'ache does a really good job of getting a lot of brown tones and earth tones. And that was one of the reasons why I fell in love with their Pablo line. And I feel like it's super easy to find or mix brown tones to get all different colors of brown hair and different skin tones. Although I do think the finishing layer in the wax-based or the oil-based pencils does give the best results. At least I found that to be the case here. And then here it was just water only. And I don't know, there's parts of me that kind of like that skin tone effect, and part of me that feels it's a little too yellow. And I didn't do a great job with the shading, so lots of boo-boos there. But I'm still learning, but to me this is the best I've been able to get from using water-based watercolor pencils. So I just thought I would show for inspiration. And you can see here I've kind of written out the different colors for future reference for skin, hair, and these are the basic undertones. You can either go pink or cream or yellow. Kind of think of that with makeup. And then here's the shading tones that you can use. And then here are the deepest tones you could use for skin, lips, or hair. And then I love this permanent blue. It's absolutely gorgeous for the eyes. That if you only bought one pencil because you wanted to do a test, I love the permanent blue in this collection. So here I tried another attempt at just using the watercolor pencils without any wax on top, and you can see I just went way too dark. And I couldn't recover at all because this isn't watercolor pencil and this isn't watercolor paper, and you're kind of stuck with what you get. So this was a practice test and it just came out all wrong. You can see here in the hair, I was just kind of going through this learning curve, and this is just one wash of color and water. And what I did is I just filled in the darkest tones, the mid-tones, and the lightest tones, and I covered all of it. And then I used a watercolor brush marker with just water in it, a watercolor brush pen rather, and then I laid the pen flat and went across on the side of the brush. If you use the tip of the brush, the bristles are so thick and sturdy that it pushes the water away too much. And so you really just, for me, I found I got the best results from just laying down, all of the pigment all in one fell swoop, and then covering each strand of the hair with water, a light wash of water. You don't want to squeeze the water out. You want to actually get your bristles, to get any excess water off your bristles, and then lay your brush flat and then go over it once, and that's it. Otherwise the paper is really going to shred. And so what I learned from this experience is that I went too light, and I guess I'm coming from a watercolor environment where all of the teachers recommend that you go in and redo your darkest tones, redo your mid-tones, and preserve your lightest tones. And that was kind of where I was coming from when I was just learning how to use these pencils. And what I learned is that don't do it that way. You want to get all your color down as much as possible on the first go, especially if you're not using watercolor paper in particular. So other artists may have something to say about how buildable the color is when you're actually using watercolor paper. I haven't seen a lot of artists out there that have been using these pencils for anything other than, craft purposes, although they are considered artist grade. I'm sure they're out there. I don't see them on YouTube. Here's another effort where I felt like I was doing much better on the hair, and this is where I just did one round of the darkest tones, the mid-tones, and the light tones, and I'm sort of getting the hang of it, but feeling a little discouraged because you can see the wax does act as a resist, and it makes it very hard for the color to disperse, especially if you're using those watercolor brush pens. So it's a little bit tricky, and getting it to go well is a bit of a learning curve. But this is where I was kind of saying, it's a lot nicer if you can go in on a second round with the wax or oil-based pencils and really fix that up. So you've got a nice underpainting, and then you can go back in and do second and third rounds without having to worry about the water shredding up the paper. And this has ended up being a really, really light skin tone. And I was using this color here, these yellow tones here, and it's really hard. The burnt ochre is a little bit too much rust, and then these are a bit too yellow, and these are very pink. So ideally you'd want to be blending those colors, and there didn't seem to be a perfect quote-unquote skin tone. You just kind of have to figure out how to do the shading in the shading areas and then pull that out and then work towards a lighter color and make sure you know where you want your highlights and your shadows and all of that. So anyways, I'm not great at this, but I just thought, you know, I got these for Christmas, and it would be fun to just kind of share if people were interested in seeing, because most of the videos out there are swatches of these pencils, but not a whole lot on, you know, what they actually look like once you start using them. So this was the very first thing that I did, and you can see I was just literally just going through every color in there instead of doing a swatch chart, and I was just intuitively and improvisationally picking up colors and working with them, and I was like, oh geez, okay. So you can see I hadn't quite figured out what tones go where and how to control the color and the water and all of that. So that was my first effort, just pulling them out of the box. This one I was pretty happy with, but you can see the paper, there was a lot of the wax resist going on here, and I had gone too dark, and it was very hard to come back from that. And so this is a case where I would want to go back and use wax-based pencils and really fix that up, and it will clean it up really well. This kind of think of this as being half finished and something you can come back from. But the thing I was the most happy with is the actual color of the skin tone. But the way it kind of just burst on the page, you can see I probably pressed too hard. I can actually feel the wax right there. And the wax, if you press too hard with these watercolor pencils, the wax gets laid down on the paper, and you get this wax resist that makes it very hard to layer more colors on and get it to move. I've seen that show up in the reviews, and I definitely see and experience that myself. And the way to resolve that is just to go very, 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 very light. And when you're depositing the color, and you can see this is sort of how my process is just figure out, like with Copic coloring, where your darkest colors would be, where your lightest colors will be, and just do a whole mapping out of your lightest tones, your darkest tones, and your mid-tones, and lay them in there as lightly as you can. And then with experience over time, you'll learn how much of each color you need to deposit to get the results you want, without having to do more than 2 washes of color, really. So like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the illustrations, so it was never my intention to finish this. It was just more the idea that I could practice with it. And here's another page where you can see, if you just wanted to buy some individual colors from this line, it's not very cost effective, but you can buy them as singles. I've been getting some shipments from Dick Blick, and there's some real trade-offs. You could spend $50 and get, you know, so many number of pencils for $5 each. It's more cost effective to buy them in a set. But once you buy them in a set, you're sort of stuck with duplicates if you go up to the bigger set. And if you're not sure you're ready to spend the money on a full set, it can be really confusing. So my best recommendation is to buy 1, 2, or 3 and pick out the shades that you think you're really going to enjoy a lot to practice with, maybe with skin or hair or eyes. I really like that blue that I mentioned earlier. And so these are the main colors that I pulled out that I thought were the right colors for skin, hair, and eyes. And I'll just kind of keep that on the camera there for you. And I didn't really find that there was any eye colors other than blue in the set, but that I was really in love with, but maybe that's just personal preference for me. And here I was pretty happy with the way this turned out. I was starting to learn how to use these metallic paints, and this is terrible. It's so terrible, but I discovered a fun little thing when I did this page. If you do the stars and the metallic paint, and then you do the watercolor pencils on top, the metallic paint will lift and you get a little glitter dust effect. I don't think you can see it on the camera, but in real life you can see it. And the closer I show you the metallic paint, you can see what a terrible job I did. But it really had me stumped how to color these metal pieces of jewelry on these pages until I remembered I had some metallic paint. So I would say this would be like auburn hair, and I think I did the best job with hair in terms of getting the light, dark, and mid-tones. And you can see if you cut this down the middle, I did this half first because I'm right-handed and that just felt easier to do. And you can see I didn't deposit enough color on the right side. And then over here, this was just one layer of color. And you can see I deposited the much more appropriate amount of color and on the first layer, and then just with one wash, and I was able to pull this out. So you can see it was like really saturated here and not quite saturated there. So there's a little bit of a lack of a balance between the top. I think it must have been that I was really starting to figure it out as I was working my way down. So it was really kind of like, the one good thing about this side was it was all consistently light, but then you'd have to go in with oil or wax-based pencils and really get the full saturation here. But anyways, I like I was saying in the very beginning, I'm not that great at this, but if you have a little foundation in Copic coloring and have taken a few Patreon classes in colored pencils and portrait coloring, I think you could get to the point where you're going to feel some satisfaction with these pencils with a couple of 2 or 3 pages underneath of you, and then you're going to feel a lot more confident and move forward. I think this is the last one that I did, so it's still very much kind of a hit or miss thing. I haven't really perfected the whole strategy on how to use these pencils, but I was getting happier with where I was here. It almost looks like there's color blocking going on where the colors aren't blended extremely well. And if I show it to you really closely, you can see the wax is wanting to form a type of resist right here. And so it's not ever going to be the same as watercolor. It's not going to be the kind of color that is going to run and flow and merge and I was taking some classes from Jean Haynes, and I think she calls it color fusion, where the colors just kind of merge and build together. You're still always going to be kind of dealing with a wax-based medium, no matter how you look at this. But you know, and just in terms of having fun and just having some downtime and relaxing. And for me, I wasn't feeling that well when I was doing this, and it was just kind of like nice craft therapy for me. And spending all this time indoors and just kind of feeling this sense of confinement, it was just very nice to just sit here and have this to focus on and not have to think about anything. So that is basically it. I just wanted to show you, I got another book a couple of years ago, and at Christmas, well, right before Christmas, I was using my Luminance pencils before I got the watercolor pencils, and I just took out every pencil set I ever bought because I wanted to make sure if I was going to buy a full set of any of them, I wanted to make sure I made the right decision. So I sat down and I used my Pablos to do, oh, I'm sorry, a whole page in here. I'm sorry I didn't have that bookmark before I pulled this out. And, well, I might as well just show the pages inside this book in case anybody wants to look at it while I'm helping you to find my page here. There's some really cute Peter Rabbit illustrations in here. I had originally intended to just transfer some of the illustrations from the books and then transfer that onto watercolor paper. And then when I found this, I thought, oh, this will be easier to transfer some of these onto watercolor paper and then actually practice coloring mice and bunnies. And I'm just really a big fan of Beatrix Potter. But you know what? I'm sorry, it's in another book. So now that you got to see that, let me go grab my other book. And So the Beatrix powder book doesn't have paper that's thick enough that I would feel comfortable with doing watercolor pencils with, but so I just have been trying to find a few books out there that kind of appeal to me in terms of the illustrations that I like, and then being able to hopefully transfer some of these illustrations onto proper paper, and then using watercolor pencils or actual watercoloring. This was my first attempt at just trying to figure out what these pencils do, and I had a long talk with the Caran D'ache representative here in the United States who's from Switzerland, and he was telling me that the technique that people seem to find the most success with is layering these pencils with, for example, watercolor as the first layer and then the wax or the Pablos on top, or if you start with the Luminance, then layer with the oil. So if you start with the Luminance, which is their wax-based pencil, you're going to see a lot of that texture of the pencil show up, and they don't really fill in the tooth of the page right away, but you don't want that anyways. But if you're working with a paper like this where it doesn't have a lot of tooth and the tooth fills up very quickly, a really great technique is what I used here. Is the first layer is the Luminance, and then the final layer is the Pablo. So when you're doing the burnishing, you can use the oil-based pencils for the darkest areas and even the lightest areas, and the lines work together. And so then you can kind of get this nice gradient. So that's what I was kind of messing around. Here I did watercolor as the base layer, and then I was filling it in with the oil or the wax, and it just became too heavy. But I was excited enough by this early experiment to kind of proceed and keep going with pencils. But it really does require talking to the company and getting a sense for what each line does, because that is a very difficult thing to learn from just watching YouTube videos. So about 3 weeks leading up to Christmas, I saw this illustration and I was just really enjoying using my Pablo pencils. And this is where I wanted to kind of go through a whole page and ask myself, do I want to get a whole set of Pablos, which are their oil-based pencils, or do I want to get a whole set of their watercolor pencils? And that's sort of what I had narrowed it down to. And so this is all with Pablos, and this is why I love their Pablo line so much, because I really like animals and just the brown tones. You could think of these as cool gray brown or warm browns. There's so much in there that you can work with, that you can get different colors of fur, and depending on how much of each color you use, you know, you can get a lot of variation, and they can go very opaque and very translucent. And so this is nothing but the Pablo line, and I just think this looks so velvety, and my blending here wasn't that great, and by the time I got to the fireplace, I was kind of feeling run down, and it didn't come out the best. But I was surprised at myself that I was able to kind of do all of this and be pretty happy with the results. It was never my intention to finish it. It was just more a process that I was enjoying, and maybe one day I'll come back to it, but at least I can kind of feel like I really enjoyed working with the illustration and with the Pablo line, and it was very relaxing and very enjoyable and felt very Christmassy to me. I was listening to Christmas music at the time. So I did go ahead and get the full set of Pablos, and so my plan is to work with the Pablos and the Museum Aquarelles and work with them together on some projects, and then maybe one or the other on other projects. I think it really boils down to the type of paper that you have to work with. And I could have painstakingly transferred this to colored pencil paper, for example, and then kept it between sheets of glassine or something like that, and just carefully worked on it little by little until it was completed. I so admire people who do that. I just didn't ever see myself thinking I was going to finish it, especially because I don't like all of this. But I do have the Cricut light pad, and so I could have transferred these and then just eliminated that and kind of created my own drawing, and I probably would have eliminated some of these presents. very time consuming, and I can never quite figure out what color to do the boxes. I was mostly interested in the animals and the tree, and not quite sure why the ducks are in there, and I could never quite feel happy with the yellow on the ducks. But you can see how much tooth of the paper they fill in, and they look very velvety, and they kind of have a bit of a shine to them. And so if I had to choose between the Luminance and the Pablo, I would definitely go with the Pablo, even though I know the Luminance are more well known and seem more well loved. I'm not really sure why. After I did all my tests, I found that the Pablo were much better than the Luminance for me personally. And I've seen some people complain, and this has actually happened to me with some of my Luminance pencils. There's like a scratch on the lead, and it doesn't go away even after you sharpen your pencil. It's just there throughout the entire inside barrel, inside of the barrel, throughout the entire stick of the pigment, whatever you want to call the inside part of that pencil. That scratchiness doesn't go away, and they've actually been, some people have been catching that on their pastel pencils as well. So I am going to do another review on pastel pencils in the future, because I'm also kind of obsessed with those right now. But I've had more opportunity to work with the colored pencils from Caran D'ache, and the watercolor, and then the wax, and then the oil-based. So I thought I would just kind of do a little video and see if this is helpful. I didn't see anything similar to a video like this on YouTube, so I thought, why not? I'll just put it out there and see if it's helpful for some people. I'll show you some earlier results, which are really embarrassing, but this is my first effort. I did say I did something as a first effort. This is actually the first effort. And I was pretty happy with the foliage. And can you see how much pigment comes out of these pencils? It's incredible. And then I did go on top for the first 2 layers were water, and then the second and third layers were the Pablos. And so you can see in combination how much rich color you can get. This is from Hannah Carlson. It was a postcard book, and so this is the thickest paper that her artwork comes on, and I couldn't get paper like this to go through my printer, so it was just good for practice. Here you can see, so I'm not really proud of this work, but this is again watercolor. The Museum Aquarelle watercolor pencils is the first layer, and then I went in with the Pablo on the second layer, and you can just see, like, I'm not happy with this color, but I'm happy with how much pigment I could pull out and how much of the tooth of the paper you can fill in. And really, you can get something as saturated as this with the combination of the two, or something as light and loose and really watercolory and just a very light amount of pigment deposited. So it's just up to you. So I went very light here. So the way I controlled the color on this bird and these feathers was interesting. I always keep these for reference to remind myself, how did I do that again? So the way you would control the color is just use your pencil very, very lightly. I mean, lighter than light, and then just go heavier here and make sure everything is deposited on one layer, and then do one light wash with a brush pen that is hardly wet at all. And you know, the blending is pretty good. That's this permanent blue that I love so much. So I did try some other stuff. I was stamping out images. I was trying to do no line watercoloring here, and I felt like, I don't know why this is all crumply. I think it fell on the ground. But I feel like with the aquarelles, I was able to get fairly close to what Copic markers would look like. And for people who have struggled with Copic markers and just felt like, I don't know how to get these to blend well, I felt like you can get the same effect with Copic markers as you can with these aquarelles. I literally just copied the art from the artist who did the color work, or the cover art for the stamp company, Stamping Bella. And I just imitated what she did for how she filled in the color. And you can get that with a lot more control with these watercolor pencils than you can, for me personally, with the Copic markers. I feel like with the Copic markers, I'm so frustrated with the nib on them that I just could never feel confident in filling out a whole image and getting the results that everybody else was. I just didn't feel like it was happening for me. And so I went back and I stamped out images with StazOn ink, and just use these watercolor pencils, and I was pretty happy with that result. This was just for practice, and this is actual watercolor paper. And so if you're just doing cards, I highly recommend the Aquarelles for card makers who are working with stamped out images. The one thing you have to keep in mind, this was another color of ink I used to try to get a no-line watercolor effect, and I was just too heavy-handed with the gray. But the thing I wanted to tell people is that no matter what watercolor paper you use, you're never going to get bright white. Even if it's sold as bright white, it's not going to be bright white. It's always going to be a little bit off-white. So if you're going to use dies or a cutting machine and you end up with a little bit of an edge around your image, just keep that in mind, because it's going to look a little bit off if you're using any paper with pure white in it that you put this image onto. And so I would recommend that if you are going to do watercoloring and it's on real watercolor paper, try to figure out how to find an off-white or a cream or a vanilla background paper to put your images onto. That is the key, because white just doesn't work well. I've tried everything, and it's really been a challenge for me. So anyways, that's this first effort, and here's a second effort where the paper did not curl, and I think I did a little bit of a better job with the cup, and I definitely decided that I preferred the actual darker ink compared to the no line watercolor approach, at least for this stamped image. These are both from Stamping Bella. So what I was doing is just practicing, and then if I liked it, I was gonna turn it into a card, and then I never got that far. So I just wanted to show people what is possible with these pencils. And just by way of comparison, here's something I had done much earlier for Halloween, and I feel like I was able to get something closer to what made me feel happy with my work compared to what I've been doing with Copic coloring. And so this is the watercolor pencils, and then this is me with Copic colors. So I was just mapping out where the lightest tones, the darkest tones, and the mid-tones go with the Copic colors, and seeing how far I could take it. And I mean, it's okay, but then when I got to working with my pencils, I found it was a lot easier to control the color. It was a lot easier for me to control where the color was getting laid down, and I was just so much happier with the results. I think this test is what convinced me to get the Aquarelle watercolor pencils, because I just so badly want to do watercoloring, and I've taken Anna Mason classes, I've taken Jean Haynes classes, and ultimately I never felt super happy with my ability to grow in my skill set with watercoloring. So I felt like, okay, why don't I take a step back and apply what I've learned, and just take a period of time where I'm not in a class, and just work with colors, mixing colors, and using a medium where you have a little bit more control with, for example, with the pencils. And so that's kind of the direction I've decided to take myself. So anyways, I probably have talked way too much already, and it's kind of embarrassing to show you guys this stuff that doesn't look that great, but I just thought I would put this out there because I know it's been difficult, and it's going to be somewhat of a long, difficult winter, and I just thought I would start loading some videos onto my YouTube channel and seeing if this is helpful to me, and contributing back for all the content creators out there that have been contributing to my life and making it a whole lot easier to get through this difficult time. So I hope everybody's hanging in there. I hope everybody's okay. And I know I started off this channel doing knitting, and now I'm doing watercoloring, and something about knitting is really not on the top of my priorities right now. We're not having the coldest winter in the world, but I do have a knitting video planned. So if you're interested in that, I promised that I would do a whole video on all the hats that I knit in the winter of 2020. I think I've got about 8 of them, and I was going to sit down and talk about yarn, needles, yarn needle combinations, colors, brands of yarn, everything I've learned about supplies and technique, and kind of offer that out into the world and see if that turns out to be helpful for people. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching. If not, no problems. I totally understand. Most people prefer the quick and easy version of what is trying to be conveyed, and I tend to talk a lot. So Anyways, I hope this video is interesting and enlightening, and I will hopefully have another one ready for you as soon as the sun comes back out again, one day this coming week. So thanks for watching, you guys, and I'll talk to you next time.